Hi, good evening. Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 8th Annual Westminster Book Festival. I'm Jordan Bleeker. I'm the Director of Marketing and Sales here, and my wonderful team welcomes you to Westminster. Operating as a not-for-profit community and giant, we've gotten the inside scoop on space journeys, gory murder mysteries, and presidential histories, among many other topics. This evening, though, the theme is Texas politics in Austin, and we will hear from Larry Wright about his new book, Mr. Texas. Larry will also discuss the insightful article he wrote for the New Yorker magazine about the transformation of Austin. Westminster hosts an annual book festival because this is a well-read and talented community of residents. We have an active literary and visual arts community. Our residents also publish an annual writer's journal and a monthly newsletter called the Westminster Banner. Residents have published a beautiful volume of resident art and a well-researched history book of Westminster. Westminster is also home to poetry and writing and play reading groups. We have several book clubs, a resident-staffed library, and an art studio. And of course, many published writers, both artists and academics, call Westminster home. Each year, we try to inject something new into this book festival. This year, we came up with our own New Yorker-like cartoon caption contest. You can see this cartoon here on the screen behind me. We received a lot of entries, and after our book talk this evening, we will announce the winners. One of our very talented residents, Joanne McKenzie, welcomed the opportunity to host this conversation with Larry. Joanne is an avid reader, a resident of Austin since 1964 when she came to UT, and a big fan of Larry's work. Joanne grew up outside Austin in a small town, and she has dedicated her time and career to helping people and kids through organizations like the Chamber of Commerce, LifeWorks, the Legacy Council, and Atticus Circle. She had a successful career in finance and currently is busy supporting the Grandparents for Public Schools effort at the state capitol. Joanne is no stranger to politics and the characters who fill the pages of Larry's new book. And with that, I will turn it over to Joanne.
As Jordan said, Larry is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, an Emmy Award-winning playwright, and perhaps more importantly for us tonight, he and Roberta, who's here with him tonight, his wife Roberta, are neighbors in Terrytown, and so we count them as friends and neighbors and are delighted to have them both with us tonight. We're somewhat a special audience, perhaps, too. We have distinguished former members of the legislature, such as Senator Max Sherman and Tibby Wright, and we have residents here who have worked in the Capitol, like Sharon Reynolds and Dave Helfert and Billy Ray Howard and Margaret Bowlers. So with that, not only will tonight bring back some memories, but it's very likely it will bring back some knowing laughter as well. Please join me in welcoming Larry Wright. For people who haven't yet read your book, give us a sense of what it's about.
Well, I had been interested in Texas politics. I mean, who can't be interested in it? I don't mean to single myself out. It was like this great untouched egg on the ground, an Easter egg, that everybody had missed it in the great hunt for good stories. And it is, I looked at the Texas legislature as, well, for one thing, I'm fond of it. I cherish the characters that go through it. I despair of the politics that they produce. But my favorite political body is the Texas House of Representatives. And it is really the people's house. But it says a lot about the people. I think, it's 150 members. They represent, 30 million Texans. And if some of you cooks out there might know, when you cook a bunch of stuff down, you kind of get to the essence. What's that called? Where you simmer it to the point that you can use a reduction. That's it, a reduction. It's a reduction of Texas, and it provides the essence of the state. And there are people from Baytown and Marfa and Flower Mound and Brownsville, and they're okay, move on. And you have mayors and NFL players, and you have nurses, and it's a broad swath of Texas humanity, all in this one big, beautiful room in the Texas Capitol. And every other year, a new class of people come to Austin, like Mr. Smith goes to Washington, but instead, in my case, I wrote about a rancher named Sonny Lamb, an idealist from far west Texas, who has come to try to save the West Texas way of life with a bill that's going to be the salvation, which is, as some of you may know, Texas is drying up. And out in West Texas, it's especially stark. He's a modern cowboy rancher, but living in a time of drought and a very, very difficult time to make a living. And yet, underneath West Texas is this vast, salty aquifer. So his goal is to pass a bill that would have a desalination plant that would be the salvation of the West Texas way of life. It sounds like a great idea, but he finds that there's a tremendous amount of opposition because of certain fracking interests. Anyway, that's a brief overview of what. And I should add, he's selected by a lobbyist who is looking for a candidate and who would be his pet vote. And so he lands on Sonny Lamb, and it turns out to be a miscalculation.
One of the things that I'm curious about, you've written a satire, but you mentioned the lobbyist LD.
Yeah.
And you have, in the book, mentioned real people with
Yeah.
real names.
Right.
And it appears, built amalgams of fictional and real.
Right.
How do you come to make decisions about doing that diversity?
Joanne, it's not exactly a decision. It's, when you're writing, you think about, like the opening scene is a funeral out in West Texas. The guy who held the seat in District 74 passed away. And then that's what brings the lobbyist into the picture, because he had counted on that guy for the votes, and now he's dead. Now I got to find somebody else who can replace him. So he's at the cemetery, and who should be there but Governor Abbott? And it seemed natural when I thought, well, why make up a governor when we've got? So there are certain other characters, Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton and so on, Ted Cruz, who I thought, why not? And also I wanted it to feel very contemporary, like you're reading about right now, this very minute. And so putting real characters and interfiling them with fictional ones just seemed to make my job easier and more fun and more libelous.
Do you have readers like me who become overly curious about who those amalgams are, like Angela Martinez or L.D. Stark or Odell Peoples?
Oh, okay, let's talk about Odell Peoples, because that's the one people think is the most fictitious. And Odell is, he's an oil man with a lot of money. And he has a massive building in Houston where he can survey his empire, where he started as a landman and then became midstream pipe contractor, and then got into refining. And so every bit of the oil business from upstream to downstream, he's had his hands in. And he is also a right-wing Christian fanatic and anti-gay to the extreme. That person exists. I changed him. I mean, I gave him some different qualities. And I'm not saying that he is Stephen Hosey, who is Dan Patrick's business partner and a medical doctor in Houston who specializes in selling these pills that, like sodium chloride, which will turn you as blue as this gentleman's shirt permanently. He's, that's kind of, Dan Patrick came out of the shock jock radio world of Houston. So a lot of a lot of the pigments that I used to paint the portrait of Odell Peoples are derived from certain personalities, and I defend it as being as real as it can be, because there are a lot of people that have tons of money mixing into Texas politics, and they really control it. And that's what I wanted to represent with the Odell Peoples person.
Well, we're going to get into Texas and Texas politics a little deeper down the road, but for now, let's go back to the book.
All right.
Sonny Lamb is a hero almost from the beginning. Would you read a passage about Sonny rushing into a barn to save a young girl named Mary Lou?
Okay, this is a scene out in West Texas. They don't have fire departments. People have to take care of those kinds of things themselves. So they're volunteer fire brigades. And I've always thought, I kind of admired the courage it takes for essentially amateurs to rush out into a fire and try to put a stop to it. And Sonny is the chief of this volunteer fire group, which had trying to eliminate a grass fire. Out in West Texas, they have these things called blue northers, where a lot of times you have a tremendous amount of electrical activity and no rain. And so this storm has struck the barn where the horse that belongs to Mary Lou, who's 10 years old, is in the barn. The barn was so bright that Sonny could see through the gunny sack, like looking at the sun through darkened glass. The dampness of the sack preserved his eyes so they didn't melt out of their sockets, and his helmet kept his hair from catching fire. The flames didn't care that he was being the hero. Although he had known mortal fear, Sonny had never experienced anything like this heat. In some suppressed region of his brain, he registered the spectacle of his own probable death and the final seconds of his life. His actions were spastic and confused. He was helpless. He had to turn around. There was still a chance to save himself. Then he glimpsed a huge figure rearing off to the side of him where he wasn't expecting the horse to be. Coco had found a narrow, unburned spot. She didn't register Sonny's presence. Weakened by the depleted oxygen in this furnace, she was pawing the air, her nostrils flaring, her eyes yellow in the flames and full of horror. There was no second chance with this animal. Sonny stood directly in front of Coco. He put his hand on her neck, which was ready to burst into flames. Whoa, I got you, Sonny said. Then he threw the gunny sack over her head and held it tight. Coco started to buck, but she recognized that the cool of the gunny sack was her only salvation. She kept turning around, trying to edge away from the heat, but there was no escape now. The fire was everywhere. Sonny kept his eyes closed as much as possible. He was going to have to mount her if they were going to have any chance, but she wouldn't hold still. Both of their lives depended on it. A rafter fell, and Coco reared. Now, Sonny said, calm down, girl. The sound of his voice seemed to reach her. Then he suddenly grabbed hold of Coco's mane and pulled himself onto her back. She spun around in blind confusion. He tugged on her mane until she was pointed toward the flames blocking the door, and he spurred her. Go, go, he yelled. Coco leapt into the fire.
A very moving passage, and it sets Sonny up to be not only a hero, but at least sympathetic through some circumstances that change later, obviously. What does the passage mean to you in writing that?
Well, Sonny comes across a little bit as a doofus in the beginning. He's they're having to thin out their herd because they can't afford to keep all these cows, so he takes a bunch of them to the auction barn, including his prize bull. And it gets to the point where the slaughterhouse man is going to buy this majestic animal. And so Sonny has to bid on his own animal, and he buys his bull back. And this gets all over town. And the message I wanted to give, Sonny is good-hearted and maybe a little foolish. He loves animals maybe too much because as a rancher you have to sacrifice them all the time. But then suddenly the fire starts and you see who he really is, what he's got inside him. And he's a man who's never made a mark in the world, and he really wants to. And that's what makes him vulnerable to the appeal of the lobbyist who comes to recruit him.
And is there more fact or fiction in who Sonny is? Is there a person about whom he is fashioned, or is he?
I made him up, but one day after I had written 2 drafts of the book, I got a call from a House member named Glenn Rogers. He's from Palo Pinto County, which is north of Fort Worth. And he only knew me as a journalist, and he wanted to set me straight about how politics are done in Texas, because somebody needed to let the world know. And he wanted to meet at Starbucks, and so I'm at Starbucks, and in walks this lanky rancher. He's also a vet, clearly an idealist. He's been fighting off, you may know the Wilkes brother, and people, the pipeline billionaires and the fracking billionaires who had targeted him, and he had beaten them. But he wanted me to know, as a journalist, how corrupt it is. And I was just staring at him with stars in my eyes. I said, Glenn, I just wrote a novel about you. And all the things that you're telling me are what the book is about. And so anyway, I felt confirmed, that my guy exists. And it's not just in Glenn. There are a lot of Sonny Lambs out there who, have the interests of the state in their heart and just want to represent their people. And I admire that so much.
It's a fascinating story from hearing that you created the character and then somebody stepped into it in real life. Yeah. Let's move on to your article, The Astonishing Transformation of Austin. Let's get to the important stuff first.
All right.
Do you know who owns the Pease Mansion now?
Is it 50 Cent? I don't know.
I thought maybe you had found out.
That's the rumor. I cherish the idea that 50 Cent would own the Pease Mansion so much that I just want it to be true. And he would use it as a party barn, I'm sure.
Have you met Emma Stone yet?
I hope she's not angry at me for mentioning that she moved into our neighborhood, but I'd like to meet her.
But she has moved in now. She was,
No.
when the book was being written, I think the house was under renovation.
It's still under. They're tearing it down to the, splinters. But it looks. It's going to be a beautiful house.
Nice to add to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And what about the 2 crypto brothers who fashioned this gigantic head of Elon Musk for you to take to, or for you to accompany them to the Gigafactory with?
Well, yeah, that was a lot of fun. I, I was worried that Austin wasn't gonna be weird any longer, and then boy, did it take a turn when Elon Musk moved to town. So I've set those concerns aside. But it's interesting I think everybody who's spent any time in Austin has known this feeling of disorientation that, you drive through a neighborhood that you've been familiar with for years and suddenly, what happened here? It's not familiar to you. And it's, it makes, I don't know, there's a sense of impermanence that is new to the city, I think, that everything is volatile and can be changed overnight. And I'm always astonished how quickly things have, to drive down a street, I've forgotten what street it was we were on the other day. There were long rows of apartment buildings that I never seen before. All of it finished, lived in. Now, people are there, it seemed like maybe it was just a few months before that I went down the street. I'm sure it can't be true, but that's the way it felt. And I feel that way all over the town. The article begins with, Roberta and I was asked to induct Joe Ely into the Austin City Limits Hall of Fame. And they put us up in the W, which is where the ACL is. And it was kind of romantic to get spend the night in a hotel in your own town. And so Roberta goes over and opens up the blinds and we look out, we can't even tell where we are. There is nothing familiar outside the window. And there are 10 building cranes within that parameter. And I couldn't even tell where the horizon was. I was totally disoriented, and it made me feel like I needed to kind of reacquaint myself with my own town.
Was it kind of the beginning of the article?
Yeah, that's what prompted it. I thought it would be worth my trying to go out as a reporter and figure out what's happening to our city, because everybody can see the changes, but we don't know what the future of it is.
Your article does an astonishing job with the astonishing transformation story. You talk about the reasons that you settled in Austin, uniquely crafted from your own experiences elsewhere for comparison. If you and Roberta were in your 30s today, would you settle in Austin?
I don't know. It's, we're deeply enmeshed in Austin, and we've got grandchildren here, and they're just, I'm in a band. It's really hard to leave when you're in a band. So I've got a lot of reasons to stay. But in my entire career, there's never been a good reason to live here. If I were just thinking about my business, I would be in New York or Washington or LA. That's where I do my business. And, but in part, I think, one thing that I've always liked about being here, it was still small enough to change, that a person could have an effect. And I feel that less now than I did, but it's like we lived in New York or Washington, my presence there wouldn't make any difference at all. I'm not flattering myself to say that I might make a little bit of difference in Austin, but I know that I want to be an effective citizen. And but I think that in those other towns that I mentioned, that would have no entry into that kind of citizenship.
One of the visuals that you create in the book, in the article, that captured me was you're talking about how new resident billionaires are changing Austin. And you say, imagine you invite new neighbors to a pool party and they turn out to be elephants. When they jump in, it changes things.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that phenomenon.
Well, I want to start by saying I don't object to people with money. I think that's wonderful for them to have. And people with money make a lot of important contributions. We wouldn't have hospitals without You know, we wouldn't have wings of the hospital, or we wouldn't have buildings at the UT campus. I mean, it's all, you know, mostly generous rich people. But the rich people that have lately come to Austin, they're, and again, I like so many of them. They're really interesting people, but they have odd ideas, and they've got billions of dollars to propagate those ideas. And so yeah, I guess like everybody, I thought, you know, with all these Californians moving to Texas, especially during the pandemic, like 1 out of 3 of the people coming to Texas is from California. I thought, well, this is going to change the politics of Austin and Texas, and it will become blue or purple. Well, they're not exactly blue people. They're not exactly red. They're libertarians. I'm talking about the moneyed class, the people who came here. They're tax refugees, and yet they also have, you know, they're a lot of creative free thinkers, and so I welcome them to Austin. I think Austin has a destiny. I mean, just in the last couple of years, Austin became the 10th most populous city in America. So now we have 4 of the top 10 cities in America, and so it's a very urban state. And of all the cities in Texas, Austin, I think, has the most profound creative class, and it's a fervent place. I think there are probably more talented, creative writers in Austin than there are in any other community in the United States except for Brooklyn. You know, and certainly we've got, you know, if you start talking about music, you know, we're also a very profound influence on American culture there. So that distinguishes our state, and I don't think the influx of the Californians is going to change that. I think it will add to the sense of creativity and possibility. When there's a lot of money flying around, a lot of things become possible. On the other hand, when there's that much money flying around, things change really fast. And, you know, that sense of disorientation I was speaking of will likely only increase. I talked to Michael Dell when I was doing this, and he was like the first billionaire in Austin. You know, now he's one of many. But he said, well, if you don't like change, you're in for a lot of anger. You know, the rate of change now is just going to increase geometrically.
The idea of Texas having 4 of the largest cities, you mentioned in your, I think in the article, but certainly in an interview I heard, that Texas, within the next 25 years or so, will have the population of California and New York combined.
Right.
Kind of moving from the transformation of Austin to, what does that portend for Texas politics, and as well as Austin politics, but Texas and national politics?
When I learned that, that's when I decided to write this book, God Save Texas, a nonfiction account of the state, because I don't think Texans or Americans at large have taken in the fact that Texas, as important as it is now, is going to be the determining factor in American politics. And when you have a state that dominant, California and New York combined, you know, and each of those states, by the way, lost an electoral vote in this last census, and both of those electoral votes came to Texas. And that rate of change is even greater since the pandemic. So Texas will be the state that determines everything in America. Well, wow, you know, I don't know what you felt, if you all who grew up in Texas. I always felt that we were on the margins, you know, that the country was run by the elites on either coast, and Texas was a kind of provincial, you know, provincial, but also smug and arrogant, but, had a chip on his shoulder, but, and a deep sense of inferiority that was, behind the boasting and everything else that came along with this Texas stereotype. Well, those are not good qualities for the leader of the nation. You need to have a certain kind of soberness and a seriousness of purpose, and starting with educating our kids. We're doing a terrible job of that. And right now we've got a special session where they're trying to take money away from public schools. And I don't object to charter schools, but I sure object to diminishing the amount of money that supports our public schools. It's not just a matter of, politics. It's a matter of the future of the state and the future of America. And we have to do a better job of that. We have to build the infrastructure that will support the kind of economy that needs to, one of my hobby horses is rapid transit. Now even Florida has a fast chain, but China has like 200 fast chains, and we don't have one. And, if we had I imagined the other day what the future of Texas might look like if we had this kind of dense transportation network where you could go to Dallas or Houston, in a matter of an hour. And if there were smaller trains going out to Elgin and Lockhart where affordable housing is so available, you transform the state, but it would be kind of like New York City with its boroughs. The entity of Texas would become much more intimate because we'd be so tightly connected with each other. And the spark of creativity that I think would arise from that would be profound and deeply necessary if we're going to carry the load that we've been given.
You preempted one of my questions because I was going to mention, as Jordan mentioned, that I'm very involved with the Capital Fighting Vouchers with grandparents for public schools.
Yeah.
And I know Roberta was a public school teacher. You've already told me what you think about that.
Yeah.
But I was curious because Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks are in your book, and they're the primary funders in Texas fighting to kill public schools and take money to private schools. I was curious if you had run across that conversation that prompted you to mention that in the book.
Well, actually, it was my idol, Glenn Rogers, my real life Sonny Lamb, who awakened me to this idea of Christian dominionism, Christian dominionism. I didn't know about it, but I began to investigate. And Rafael Cruz, Ted's daddy, preaches it. And it's, there are all these pillars of society, 7 of them, I think, education, government, media, business, all these
family, environment.
The mission is to seize control of those things. And that's why I think the voucher thing is such an issue for the Dunns and Wilkses of the world. They want to funnel money out of the public schools and into the private and religious schools, which would be one way to achieve dominance in that department. And it's so hostile to democracy that that's one of the things that really angers me about that.
No, and thinking about democracy and the problem of corruption, because you have talked about the current level of corruption in Texas politics. But I also heard you in an NPR interview say Texas has never really been corrupt.
Right.
But I remember the Siprit and Tom Way and the Veterans Land Board.
Yeah.
And tell me your concept of never really
there's
been corrupt.
always corruption in politics. It's not, we were not immune to it. But we only had one impeachment before Paxton. It was Paul Ferguson in 1917. And the voters were so upset they elected his wife to succeed him. So, but And,
How about being elected senator if your husband's invited?
Illinois had 4 governors out of 7 in prison. And, we don't compare to that kind of thing. Illinois, New Jersey, New York, that, where there's, that kind of corruption is unusual in Texas. And what's interesting about Texas corruption is it's so out there. They're not trying to hide it. The Paxton trial, this whole thing, the Wilkes and Ferris Wilkes and Tim Dunn, that $3 million that they, $1 million down and $2 million on loan they gave to Dan Patrick if he behaved right. That's open corruption. And, there may be a reckoning in that department somewhere along the line. It hasn't happened yet, but it's dismaying to see it take root in Texas. And there's a grand jury out there that may bring us a little bit of peace.
Well, moving away from the corruption in Texas politics to the international scene, you've lived and written extensively about the Middle East, lived there in Cairo and taught there. What's your perspective on the current situation in Israel and Hamas?
Well, I have spent a lot of time in the Middle East, and I was in Palestine and Israel in February this year, and I could sense things. It was intifada weather. It really felt like something was brewing. That's where I was with the Palestinians. The Israelis were so complacent. It was like there's nothing to worry about. And this was before the justice, trying to tame the Supreme Court and Netanyahu taking over the court. But as far as the Palestinians were concerned, I don't think the Israelis were giving them very much thought at all. This, despite the fact that there was awful violence on the part of the settlers. I was with peace activists in Hebron. Hebron is one of the most hateful places I've ever been in my life. I began my career covering civil rights, and I saw a lot of hatred, but I never saw hatred at that level. And I was getting a tour of the old city of Hebron with this guy, Issa Amro, a peace activist, and hated by the settlers and by the Israeli army. They see him as a provocateur, and what he's trying to provoke is peace. But we were walking through the old city, and this soldier assaulted him right in front of me. And there was a photographer who filmed it, videoed it. But the soldiers in Israel, they go into the army right after high school, so they're like 18 years old. And this was a big, handsome kid, and he took Issa up, lifted him by the neck, and hurled him to the ground, his head missing a curve by just a fraction of an inch, and then tried to finish the job. And some of his colleagues from the army tried to get in the way, but this happened right in front of us while we were filming. Just imagine the sense of entitlement that you could do that to somebody when it's being watched. And when we posted it, it was the amount of hate I got directed at me was, they were thousands and thousands of emails and Twitter feeds, and it was really bizarre. I felt like I had reached into a beehive, and I wonder what'll happen if I stick my hand in there. It was ferocious, and I think it's a little annoying, more than a little annoying to me, but I've been involving myself in affairs in the Middle East for a long time, and and everybody says is, nothing will ever change. But in my lifetime, and I can see in your lifetime and many of your lifetimes, a lot of impossible things happen. Apartheid in South Africa came to an end. The Soviet Union dissolved. That would never happen. We elected a black man president. Who would have guessed? All of these things happened, and history moved on. But this, I'm the same age as Israel, and so it's a long life for a person, but a short life for a nation. But this is something that has gone on way too long, and it's a political problem that can be solved. I wrote a book about called 13 Days in September, about Carter, Begin, and Sadat spending 13 days in Camp David and coming up with the first lasting peace treaty in the Middle East. This is a peace that was forged by Jimmy Carter, an evangelical Christian one-term governor, not a very popular president, Anwar Sadat, who had been an assassin and got into office because of the death of Gamal Abdel Nasser, and Menachem Begin, who was a terrorist. And these are not likely candidates, right, for making peace, but those men had political courage, and they brought peace. It can be done, but they don't exist on the stage right now. The Middle East, especially Israel and Palestine, are cursed by their elected officials.
And moving back to Texas politics, what is your thought about Governor Abbott's trip to Israel and Dan Patrick's contribution of the $3 million to Israel bond?
Well, I don't know what's in their hearts, but if they were doing it for pure politics, their actions wouldn't be very much different from what they are. And I would not go to the Texas legislature for advice about the Middle East in the first place.
Let's circle back to the book. Mention that Sonny Lamb remains somewhat heroic all throughout the book. And then Glenn Rogers steps in to be the personification of Sonny Lamb. Do you think the Texas legislature can reinvent itself as a judicious functioning body?
Well, there's a problem in that there's only one functioning chamber. There are 31 senators, and they're all like indentured servants. It's the will of a single individual, and who is not interested in compromise at all. I think the Texas House has been kind of heroic in this, in trying to protect the public schools. As Glenn said, out in the country where he lives, the public school is the main institution. And, it's where their kids all want to get to know each other. It's where the teams play and so on. They don't want to sacrifice that. And it's fascinating because we think of those areas as being solid red. This is that the governor would go after one of the main bases of his party is surprising to me. And it's in the House that they're fighting back. So I think that there's possibility. It's not going to happen anytime soon.
You mentioned that the demographics of Texas suggest that it will drift blue. How do you imagine that happening?
Well, I have mixed feelings about that, about the possibility, because if you look at the demographics in Texas, we're one of the most urban states in America. We think of people all over the country think of us as a rural state, but we have, the cities are where the population is, and also it's where people are moving. So the cities are all blue. We're a majority minority state, and we're one of the youngest states in the union, and young people have a lot of problems with issues like abortion and climate change and so on. Hispanics who now equivalent population to Anglos have never really had a candidate statewide that they could. I mean, there was a statewide candidate, elected Attorney General Dan Morales, who went to prison, so not the best exemplar. But you know, the absence of those kinds of candidates has enfeebled the Hispanic vote in Texas. All those things would suggest that, you know, there was a demographic tide coming. And then I look at Donald Trump picking up those very people. So I'm confounded, to be honest. I don't know what's going to happen. You know, rationally, I think, you know, that there would be a swing. There would be a more balanced electorate. But when I see these numbers that were for Trump, the very people, even young people, that he's picking up, I'm at a loss, you know, so I can't tell you, I no longer trust my prognostications. I'm afraid to.
We'll let you off the hook on that one. Ending on a more heartfelt note that Sonny Lamb seems to bring to bear, and Big Bob Bigby, his eulogy. Would you read a passage toward the end of your book about Bigby's eulogy?
Big Bob is the Speaker of the House, and he has passed away when this happens. And Sonny gives the eulogy. Big Bob wanted me to share his concerns with you. Our Texas hearts have been hardened against each other. Our politics have turned into culture wars, me against you, wars that are nominally about values but really are about identity. The truth is, in Texas, conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats have pretty much the same values. We love our families. We're proud of the economic dynamism of the state, the jobs we create, the opportunities we provide. We want the best for our children, the best education, the best future, but we're continually fighting over things that don't really matter. You know this. We're sick of the hatred of immigrants, the school shootings, the attacks on people who are different in one way or another from who we are. All the carnage caused by political culture that is reeling out of control. These are the very problems that we've been elected to resolve. Instead, our political leaders exploit these differences and lead the state further away from Texas we all love. At the end of his life, these were the concerns that preoccupied Speaker Bigby. But he won't be here to shape the future. That's up to us. If we want to honor the legacy of Bob Bigby, we need to keep him in our hearts and cherish the state as he did. That's a tall order. But as the Speaker would say, to do otherwise would be un-Texan. Big Bob wanted you to know that he loved Texas, from the Red River Valley to the muddy waters of the Rio Grande. He wanted to be sure we didn't forget the love part.
Yeah. That kind of concludes my questioning. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, did you have some questions? Did you, from
We're
the
going to
audience?
have questions from the audience, but before I turned it over to the audience,
No,
I
let's
thought
just
I
see
would
what
give you a chance to
they have to say.
we're going to let you, we've got a couple of folks bringing mics around, and a lot of you have memories and experiences that intersect with Larry's work. So we invite you to ask questions or share memories of your time in politics or around the Capitol Dome or in the old Austin.
My name is Ann Palmer, and my husband just finished your book, so now I get to read it.
Oh, good.
I've been hardly waiting. But what I wanted to ask you is this. Did the people that you wrote about with pseudonyms realize that they were in the book, and did they resent it, or did they appreciate it?
Well, most of those people already didn't like me. So I'm not worried about changing their opinion.
You've written about so many different things. You'd be very eclectic. You wrote about the Church of the Scientology. You wrote about 9/11. Now, you've written a lot about Texas and Austin. How do you choose your subject matter? What motivates you to choose these very different subject matters to write about?
That's the hardest question, because the hardest thing about writing is knowing what you want to write about. And it's not always obvious. One of the nice things about journalism is that you discover things. I mean, it's especially hard to figure out what you want to write if you're just sitting in your office thinking, what do I want to write? Oh gosh, there's nothing interesting in the world. You have to get out there and find it. And then there's a question of, do I want to spend 5 years on this project? I could write a magazine article and get away 3 or 4 months, and then a book is going to take me longer, sometimes a lot longer. So you make a calculation about it, but finally you have to fall in love with it. And it takes that. You just think, many times I research ideas that I think might be worth it, and then I think, I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend my time doing that. But you can't get too picky, you don't do anything. So Roberta will tell you, since she's right in front of you, it's miserable when I don't have a project. And what I'm really good at when I don't have a project is finding things for her to do. So she's always eager for me to find the next project. But another thing that there's a range of stuff I write about. And the person who wrote The Looming Tower is confounding to some people that I would write something that's kind of a satire. But I made a resolution years ago that I would only do things that were important or fun. I wanted to be engaged in the main conversations of our nation in our lifetime, but I didn't want to miss the joy. And so if you wanted to understand where I'm coming from, that's the axis that governs my work.
I got to enjoy the audiobook version of your Mr. Texas
Yeah.
twice.
Oh, really?
I'm Austin Grandy, by the way.
Oh,
But, yes, but tell us about the iterations of the book. I want to hear about the musical version, especially. The music, the books and the words and music.
Well, thanks, Austin Granny. I started this project as a movie script back when Ann Richards was governor. So it's a long time. Texas was blue. Remember that? And Pete Laney, this cotton farmer from the Panhandle, was the Speaker of the House, and he was Democrat. And then Bob Bullock was lieutenant governor. And I was, fascinated by, I love the stories about Texas politicians. And when I wrote it as a movie script, I ran into the problem of plausibility. I took it out to Hollywood, and that wouldn't happen. It happened. Like, how many of you remember Mike Martin? Legislator from Longview, and he apparently facing a difficult election, so he naturally had his cousin shoot him, and in order to gain the sympathy vote. And massive vote in Texas, as you can do, sympathy vote. And he said that he had been shot by the mafia, which is not one of our big problems. And so the Texas Rangers caught on to his scheme, and they tracked him down to his mother's house in Longview, and he was hiding in the stereo cabinet. And which prompted Molly Ivins to say, he always did want to be the speaker. So that was seen as way too implausible. But once you start diving into what really happens in Texas. I for early on in this project, I went to talk to Pete Laney, and he was a wonderful guy, and I confided that, you know, I wanted to write a movie or a television series set in the Texas House of Representatives. And he said, "It's been the dream of my life to have a television series in the Texas House of Representatives." I might be able to help you with that. So I asked him, you know, if I have this lobbyist who's at war with my hero, and he has to do something that would really screw him up. And what could that be? Well, you could put a toxic waste dump in his district, and that would mess him up really bad. Wow, I thought that this is guy. I'm so glad to talk to you. So I said, well, you hunt around here. You legislators, and you know, you go out hunting. Well, I don't do it myself. I have a friend who does. And well, what do they hunt? Pigs. You know, pigs. It sounded really unsporting. And wild pigs, yeah. And said, honey, get Sharp on the line. John Sharp, comptroller at the time, now the chancellor of A&M. Sharp, got a young man here who wants to know how you hunt pigs. Well, we go out at night in our cutoffs and we use pistols. And we set the dogs after them. And now the dogs will go after a pig's nuts. And so to protect himself, the pig will back up against a tree, and then you just pop him in the eye. And I thought, wow, these are the Democrats. Okay.
You've written fiction and you have written nonfiction. Some people think that fiction can be more truthful, whereas nonfiction is factual, but the broader idea of what truth is, it seems like maybe in this book you've tried to blend the two. Do you have a preference for what you write?
No, I don't. I write in, you know, I've written plays, I've written movies, I've written, you know, I have not written heroic poetry or something like that. But I like exploring what each, you know, like in this you know, not only did I write it as a play, and then I wrote it as a musical, and then you wanted to know about the music, and then I was so stymied that I asked my agent, what should I do with this? And he said, podcast. So I wrote 9 episodes of a podcast, and then my son Gordon and Marcia Ball, we wrote 53 songs, and we had the best time. So a roundabout way of answering your question is that I find there's joy and meaning in all of these forms that in the stories that I've been privileged to tell, and you know, it's been a revelation that each story, a particular story, this story, can be told in any different medium. But it's a different experience, and you know, Marcia and Gordon and I are determined that we're going to get this on a musical stage at some point.
Are you still lobbying to turn Camp Mabry into Austin Central Park?
Yes, I am. I've been talking to, matter of fact, Speaker Dade Phelan used to fly fish down in the pond down there when he was a kid. I'm tied up on another novel that I've got to finish, and I really want to get around to working on putting that park idea together. It's been a project of mine for decades. Back when George Bush was looking for a presidential library, I was trying to get him to use Camp Mabry as a place for that, because the Carter Library is a great park And Bush wanted to sell it, but the neighbors were afraid that, you know, the traffic and stuff like that, but it turned out that the real obstacle was that the National Guard didn't want to give up the PX. And so, I think we can find a way to compensate them on that.
My name is Peter Ellis. I had a question. Phil Moyers, some 10 years ago, had lamented the direction that journalism was headed. And I wondered what your thoughts might be in terms of this whole nature of truth that we've experienced in the last couple of years in particular. That you saw journalism, newsprint headed now in the future.
Well, I owe a debt to Bill Moyers. He gave me my first blurb, and it was a book about growing up in Dallas during the Kennedy assassination. And I was a nobody writer, and he wrote the most generous blurb. And so I've always admired what he thinks. I think, you know, the press is going through a really difficult period right now. For one thing, especially at the local level, you see newspapers being ripped up by the roots and just disappearing, and communities becoming unaware of what's happening in their own communities. This is a disaster. And then you get it replaced by things like Axios, which is, you know, just sort of like a step above a neighborhood gossip sheet, you know. This is really dire. And then at a national level, the journalism world has contracted considerably. There were so many more magazines and so on that when I was a young reporter. It doesn't mean that there have been outlets online that have compensated to some degree but the standards aren't necessarily there. Another thing is that the partisanship, Europeans have had partisan newspapers forever. You know, you would know a person's politics by the newspaper he subscribed to. And that really wasn't so true in America. You know, when you turned on CBS Evening News, you could be a Republican or a Democrat. It wouldn't matter to you because there was a commonality of trust. And that's totally gone. And so you are watching different news if you're on Fox or MSNBC. And there's something interesting about it in that you get these different perspectives on the same events. And so I honor that. I like to watch, Roberta doesn't particularly like to follow me in certain channels, but I like to see what other people are thinking about it. But the echo chamber that we've created by having the partisan divide in the press is really damning. And Ted Cruz once asked me to lunch. Why, I don't know. And still to this day, but we lasted for 3 hours. And but the one thing that he said that I really remarked is he said Trump has broken the press. And you know, I think in a way there's truth. It became a kind of fanatical resistance to a lot of our journalism, and where reporters would weigh in on the front page of the New York Times about, you know, offering their opinions about the economy and so on. That's not journalism. That's opinion. And but there was a general sense of permission to step out of our traditional role, and I think it's going to be hard to get back. So it's a long-winded way of ruminating over your question.
I'd like to make an observation about the change of conditions in Texas politics. I've been following it for a long time, longer than you've been living, I guess. And I recognize today that Texas politics is corrupt as it has ever been in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I think back, you were mentioning about the difference in states, like states had their governors indicted or their public officials. I remember when the largest federal expenditure at the time was being spent throughout the United States on the interstate highway system. New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Louisiana all had their public officials under indictment for corruption because of the easy money.
Yeah.
There was never a public official in Texas accused of anything like that.
And we had the best highways.
What's that?
And we had the best highways.
And the number one highway, the Bureau of Public Roads loved us.
Yeah.
Loved us. But having served in the legislature when it was all Democratic, conservatives were the same thing as we might recognize the Republicans of the past. But we worked together, and there was a mutual respect. And I've mentioned several times I was a liberal. I've agreed with nearly everything you said. So, but I was a hardcore liberal. But nearly everything that the liberal minority advocated while I was in the legislature, within 5 to 10 years, every bit of that type of thing was enacted by law by moderate to conservative legislatures. We had a different kind of people then, and I don't know what the answer is, but I do appreciate your bringing it out. I think more people need to have it driven home to them what's going on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You say that the House of Representatives is your favorite institution. I've often wondered, who are these people that serve? Because I taught school for 28 years. If I'd gone in and told my principal, hey, I'm taking off 140 days here, and then there's all these extra sessions, they would have fired me.
Yeah.
What kind of people, is there a general pattern for people who serve in the House of Representatives where they can take off every other year? Are they all lobbyists that are actually working for somebody else? Or how many of them are lawyers?
There are a lot of lawyers, that's for sure. Oftentimes, people who go into politics who have to give up that kind of time are self-employed, or they have a long leash on their jobs, or their employers have an interest in having somebody in the legislature. Even like teachers, there are teachers in the legislature, there are nurses, there are people that have ordinary jobs and they go on leave. So if you're still thinking about it, maybe you should give it a shot.
We have time for one more question.
In your book, the character Big Bob is clearly modeled on Bob Bullock.
Yeah.
How accurate was your description of him?
I was too nice to him. But he fascinated me as a character. And he fascinated the whole state. I mean, this was a guy like my character who was married 5 times. As Churchill once observed, it was a second marriage, as he said, or a triumph of hope over experience. But 5 times. He was an alcoholic. He was reckless, crazy. He had, the thing about Bob Bullock is that with all of his character flaws, which were innumerable, everybody knew that he loved the state and that he wouldn't hurt it. So, and he did a lot of personal damage. He hurt a lot of people. On the other hand, he became friends with the parking attendant at the Capitol and helped him through his 12 steps. And the parking attendant, after Bob died, said that there was one step that Bob himself could never get through, which was forgiving himself. But a lot of people with alcohol problems or other emotional problems, he had a way of seeing, who was in trouble. And he would call them in, let's talk it over, listen, he said, God, man, that just sounds terrible. You said that everything is so screwed up in your life. It's just awful, and I totally understand. But he reached into his briefcase and pulled out one of his guns. And he said, "You could just end it right now." I totally would understand. So nobody ever pulled the trigger, and many have testified that Bob Bullock got them through the hardest time in their life and this sort of thing. But it's crazy, right? Somebody could have done so, and but I don't know. He was an irresistible subject for me to model my character on and reanimate him in modern times and see who he would be if we had Bob Bullock once again in our legislature. Well, listen, I want to thank all you guys. I sure enjoyed talking to you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for that.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay, so I have 2 and 3 right here. And let me tell you what I'll just pass it over to you.
All right.
Okay, everyone, I want to make a few quick announcements. Before moving back to the book fair, earlier I mentioned our cartoon caption contest, which was judged by residents Lori Humphreys and Mike Roach. Thank you so much for doing that. I'd like to invite Larry now to announce our winners.
All right. You want me to do 1, 2, and 3 in that order?
Do 1, 2, and 3, yeah.
All right. Number 1, Toto, we aren't in Old Austin anymore. Number 2, reading on a device is okay, but a book is more huggable. Number 3, no, Rover, we don't change your name to Spot.
Thank you, Larry. For those winners, please see the table in the back and we'll arrange for an autographed book. This wraps up this portion of the evening. I would like to take a quick moment to say that this annual book festival is a great example of the enriching lifestyle that we offer here at Westminster. If you enjoyed this program and would like to learn more about this wonderful community, I encourage you to fill out that welcome card that you found on your chair. If it's for you, it's for a friend or someone you know that can benefit from a community like ours,
Talk to
we'd
who?
love to talk with you and schedule a personal tour.
I don't know.
That being said,
Name is
please
being
enjoy
flooded.
cocktails, please enjoy some food. Make your way back to the book fair towards the back of the room
Yes, if you go
to meet
down
guest
the
authors
steps here,
and our journal committee
back.
members. Also, Larry will be selling and signing books.
Oh,
So
yeah.
allow him to please make his way back to the back of the room as well. We will sell out of books. Please talk to the folks in the back and we can arrange for a signed book plate for you.
I was gonna
Okay?
ask you a question.
Be sure to grab a commemorative bookmark and thank you so much for coming.
If you begin using it,